Welcome, welcome, welcome. This is the Public Works Podcast. My name is Joseph Blackman, and today I got a real treat for you. For you, his name is Jorge Morales, and he is the director of the Watershed Protection Department for the City of Austin Watershed Department in beautiful, apparently sunny Texas. Jorge, say what's up to everybody.
How's everybody doing? Yes, it's beautiful. I can't complain. This is the best time of the year. So if you visit Austin, springtime is the best time. It's in the 80s because don't come in the summer. Ooh-wee. It's hot.
We don't get a couple 80s on the back end of the summer, closer to fall. No, no, no.
No, those are unheard of. Yes.
Okay. Okay. Good stuff. Good stuff. Well, Jorge, thanks for hopping on the show today. You're the director of the Watershed Protection Department in the Austin Watershed Department. That's a lot. Tell us what the Watershed Department is about and kind of give us a 30,000-foot view of what you normally do or what your
Yes,
role.
of course, Joseph. So that's the biggest question I usually get or confusion. What is watershed protection? People don't really understand we are. So to keep it simple, we're the stormwater utility for the city of Austin, or drainage utility, if you will. And in many organizations, local governments across the country, stormwater usually falls under public works, and I've lived in I've been in other agencies where public works had stormwater, and that's how it operates. Or it could also fall under the water utility, and water has water, wastewater, reclaimed water, but stormwater is basically the water that falls from the sky. And so our department is in charge here in Austin to protect that waterway for the water quality. Austin, Texas resides in the central part of Texas. And if you've been to Texas, you'll notice there's hills country, we call it. There's a lot of hills on the west side. And then we have the coastal region, the Gulf of Mexico, right? And so those come together to form quite a interesting area. So we're known as Flash Flood Alley here in Austin, Texas. So a lot of things that we deal with has to do with flooding. And so our department is the primary department that focuses on making sure we keep the storm systems functioning, upsizing them, keeping the community safe. And so we deal with erosion issues, flooding issues, and water pollution. And that's what we do. Our primary function is to protect the community of Austin, Texas, of those components.
Okay. I've hit myself to the concept of the combined sewer, where water flows in with the wastewater and all goes to the plant. What would you say is the majority of Austin's makeup? How does it work with the pipes underground? And then we'll dive into kind of what you do on the day-to-day.
That's a great question, Joseph. And that happens in northern or eastern communities. In Texas, we do not have combined sewer systems. Actually, we have independent storm sewer systems, and precisely why we are separated pipes. And so the wastewater is managed in a complete different pipe system. Even the materials are different for the most part here in Texas. We're mostly concrete for storm water. And so we capture the water from the streets through inlet systems and get it to the creeks. And ultimately, it drains to the Colorado River here in Austin, and that goes down to the Gulf of Mexico. And so we are very independent. So not by design. I'm not saying it won't happen every once in a while, but not by design. And so if it's happening, we have to recognize it, correct it, and move forward.
Sure. All right. So walk us through a random Tuesday for Jorge. You get to the office, you get that cup of coffee and you sit down. What are you doing from the time you get that coffee done to till you leave for the rest of the day?
Well, as the role as an executive, part of it keeping an eye on the organization. And so lucky for me, I have a great executive team. I've recently hired a deputy director. Didn't have one. I just added it a couple of months ago. And so I have assistant directors. I have a chief administrative officer, chief strategy officer. So a lot of my day does consist in meetings, believe it or not. And so checking in, having one-on-ones, but also responding to issues that come in. So here in Austin, we have the tool that many communities use is 311. And so complaints come in that way. Those are taken care of by, we have a team that reviews those, investigators that go out and deal with that. But we also have council districts here, like many communities. And so we have 10 council districts and a mayor. It is a city manager form of government, Austin, Texas. And nonetheless, when the complaints come in, they get escalated every once in a while. So we want to keep an eye on that, make sure we're being responsive to our community, our elected officials. And so my day literally starts with me meeting with my assistant, executive assistant. We have a quick check-in on what's on the calendar, what's coming in, what additional complaints. get numerous emails. I could literally spend 8 to 5 on the email, but we're not going to do that, right? Because other than that, we just be stuck in an office. I lead by managing around, so I like to get around, So our department is about 450 employees, and so
Wow.
multiple divisions, multiple sections, and we do anywhere from monitoring the lake here in Austin. Our scientists are out there. Our crews maintain the lake as well, to responding to the concerns, complaints. We do construction, we do engineering. So we do a little bit of everything. So once again, I come in, check what the day looks like, usually have overlapping meetings. So we clear the calendar, start clearing those conflicts where we can, or start strategizing how I'm going to multitask. But in the end, I do have a lot of in-person meetings, a lot of virtual meetings, and also plan the week ahead on a Tuesday. And, by then it's the day after Monday. It's not as hectic, right? But it's a busy day, pretty much from 8 to 5, and then day doesn't end. As a director, you're always monitoring communications, media, and sometimes going to evening meetings, weekend meetings, meeting with the community, meeting with other departments. So it's a great job. I really enjoy it.
Nice. The you talk about flash meaning flash flood alley, which is an interesting concept, because I've observed since Austin has been Austin, there's been a lot of floods in the area. But now we have all this infrastructure. It's 2025. There's a lot of different things that are around now that weren't around, let's say, 50, 100, 300 years ago. But we do have an idea what the weather's going to look like. So how often does Jorge look at the Weather Channel or to see what it's going to look like in Austin in regards to stormwater?
Oh, wow. I forgot to tell you that. When I wake up in the morning, first thing I do. So we all have that app on our phone, right? That app's not as accurate, but in our department, just a little history of our department. Once we had the major flooding in 1981, where 13 fatalities here in our community. And we've always had flooding in Austin. It's part of our DNA from the 1800s, and as we've been collecting data because of the Colorado River, and it just comes through, and the flash flooding effects in the creeks, and they're usually dry, but they get filled up quickly when it rains. And so after the 1981 floods, the council and the community created the drainage utility charge and started tracking. We created what is called the flood early warning system. So that's a team of folks on my department that monitor weather 24/7, and we work with the Homeland Security Emergency Management Office. The Emergency Operations Center sometimes gets activated when there's a lot of flooding. And so we work with them to help notify where we're expecting the rain, because Austin is a large territory, large geographical area. So sometimes you may have rain in one side of town and it's not raining. You may have flooding in one side of town and it's not raining on the other side, right? That can literally happen because of the way our watersheds are draining to the river, right? And so we do have staff constantly monitoring. Like last week, we had a good amount of rain we were expecting. Luckily for us, it didn't hit Austin, but unfortunately, it went to South Texas. About a foot of rain fell over there, and all you got to do is look up the news. It overwhelmed the storm system. So we want to make sure that we're completing our capital improvement projects where we're adding storm systems to improve areas that we know that flood. And so we're monitoring that, but also weather is important because it changes very quickly here in Texas, and springtime can be very volatile, right? Where the weather, was it the week before last, on a Friday, I think, no, it was Sunday, maybe, the weather, we were expecting some kind of behavior, might get some storms. We ended up getting 1.5 inches in a couple hours, which is a lot of rain, and so we do have staff full-time monitoring it, and we communicate it to our partners in the community.
I like to play the game of, like, let's say we started a brand new community. You didn't adopt a community where there's already infrastructure there. Let's say we go to Mars, and Jorge Morales, he's picked to be the stormwater manager on Mars, right?
Nice.
What would be some of the first things you would want to implement that can, like, that 20% of activities that could alleviate 80% of our headaches in regards to stormwater? What would those couple, 3 things be?
First thing we would do is we would do a flyover and do a LiDAR. You know what the LiDAR is? The system that actually surveys to identify the terrain, because we want to start creating floodplain maps. That's the first thing we want to do. Because as we develop our new community, we don't want anybody anywhere near where it floods, because prevention is really the best way to protect the community. Unfortunately, in Austin, over the years, they had developed many homes in areas that were flood prone. But that's before we actually had mapped the FEMA floodplain maps. And so we actually have bought out like houses that were in risk of flooding, over 1,000 homes here in Austin in the time, I've been here, and so
Wow.
because there was no solution, there was no engineering solution. Literally, the best way was to remove those people out of harm's way and relocate them to other parts of the community, right? And in some cases, because of the affordability component here in Austin, some people left the community altogether. But yeah, first thing we would do in Mars is map out the terrain where we're going to start, creating our development, and make sure that we create the floodplain maps, the 100-year, the 500-year, and or whatever.
Wow.
Climate numerology we may use in Mars. It may be a little different over there. But long story short, that's first thing you want to do is make sure you're not letting people live in areas that potentially be at harm's way.
Wow. Okay. All right. So now we got to dive into the backstory, into the, what makes up the superhero of Jorge Morales. Like, there's always an origin story to every superhero. So give us kind of your career path from, let's say, high school all the way up until today.
Wow, that's a great question, Joseph. So how much time we got left on this podcast?
Yeah. Give us the brief version of it.
Yeah. So I grew up in the Dallas area in Texas in the 90s. And so in the 90s, it was a little rough. There was a lot of things happening in gangs and all kinds of stuff. So I joined the Army. And so I started right out of high school. I think I turned 18, and maybe 3 weeks later, I was in boot camp. And so I left as quickly as I could leave, right? And so the military really kind of started shaping who I am, from the beginning. So I spent about a little bit over 5 years in the U.S. Army, helped me develop my leadership skills and my desire to serve, and when you join the military, that's the ultimate, you want to serve, right? And so I came out and I really liked math and I like solving problems. Grew up around construction. My father didn't get past elementary school, but he was a great construction concrete worker. And so that's what I grew up around. And so I had this desire to learn something that along the lines of that. So I came out of the military and went and applied to UT engineering and civil engineering. So I got a civil engineering degree after the military. And matter of fact, in 1998, when I started my program, I started working for the city of Austin Watershed Protection Department as an intern. So I've actually come full circle in my career. I started here as an intern, and now I'm blessed to be the director for this department. So got that civil engineering degree. Once again, it's because I grew up around construction, natural tendency to be a public servant. It's always been who I am. It's the natural fit. We just spent the whole day as an executive team with the city manager on Friday, and our topic servant leadership. So I'm like, this is my thing, because that's who I am, right? And so I think that's really what's defined me is I like to serve my community, and you'll see it in church community, neighborhood community. No matter where I've gone, I always try to find a way to give back. So yeah, 23 years since I got my bachelor's degree in civil engineering. It's been mostly in the public sector. 3 to 4 years was in private, but everything I did in that private company was for the public sector. And so I'm public servant true and true, right? So I've done from pavement engineering to project management to water resources in another community, because I did go back to Dallas for about 5 years for one of those communities. And now I'm doing stormwater, but I've overseen the capital improvement programs here for the city of Austin in another capacity. So I was building things at the airport, at the libraries, the fire stations. So I've done a lot of construction. So it took me back to my roots, which I grew up around construction. So I think in a nutshell, that's what it is. Growing up around construction, liking math, liking becoming an engineer, and here I am.
Wow. I like it. That the thing that stuck out, what you said, was the internship. I feel that a lot of people that I interview on the show, even meet along the journey, they got that summer internship. That their dad was like, "You're not going to be sitting around the house all summer. Go do something. I know somebody at the city. Go work 10 hours a week with them." And then boom, 20 years later, they're still with the city. And I feel like that's a decent path to get people into these municipal public works jobs, to backfill some of the people who are leaving the industry. So we'll definitely get into that. But one of the questions I want to ask is just skill sets. You've been at this for a while. You spent a little bit of time on the private side, but I could tell you have that true heart of a public servant. What would you say is one of the main skill sets that you would advise somebody to pick up to be successful with a long career like you have?
Great question, Joseph. So, as I stated, I am a civil engineer, so that's definitely a good skill set because you learn a lot when you go to engineering school, and but it's not required. Literally, the role of a director in most public works in the country does not require you to be an engineer or a civil engineer
Really?
per se. But it's good to have that experience. So if you have a construction background and you want to keep developing those soft skills, which naturally when you get a degree, you're working on that already to begin with. But here in my department, we've been able to promote people that came in straight out of high school. They started, in construction, and they worked their way to supervisor, superintendent, division managers. So we removed some of those barriers where it requires a degree. But more importantly, we've created the tools to allow people to get their degrees, even if they've been out of school for 20 years, 30 years. We have programs here to help people get that piece of paper that helps remove that barrier as well. But the ability to solve problems is really at the core of what we do in public works, right? And so you have to be able to care about your community and the community you're serving and be able to think through solutions, regardless if it's engineering or just using your past experience to find a solution to whatever you're dealing with. And in my career, as an engineer, I always continuously want to grow. So I go to conferences and continue to hone in my technical skills. But as you move up the chain of command, you want to hone in on your leadership skills, which is a different set of skills, right? And so I highly encourage people to work. You don't stay stagnant. You always got to be going to conferences, reading books, and finding ways to continue to grow your mind professionally, both technical and from a leadership standpoint. And last but not least, I went back in 2019 and got my master's in executive. It's an executive master's in public leadership because I knew I'm a public servant. I want to stay in this arena. And so I went back and got it from the LBJ school here in UT Austin. But I highly recommend that as you continue to move up, you keep challenging yourself. It's not easy, especially once you have kids. Everybody's like, you got 5 kids and you still going back to school? Like, yes, sir. Because you got to keep working at it, right? It just, some things will come naturally, but leadership is always evolving. It's a skill set that you have to keep honing in on.
Yep. 100%. Story time. I need a story from Jorge. When something went wrong under your watch, what you did to fix it, and then what lessons you learned from it to apply to your future career.
Oh, wow. Ooh, yeah, that's a great one. So Austin, Texas, not immune to emergencies like many communities, but one that comes to mind is more recent in 2023. January, February, we had winter storm. Actually, in 2021, the whole state of Texas literally froze and we shut down. Power went out, water went out. I mean, unfortunately, we lost many lives throughout the state of Texas because of the grid went down. 2023, 2 years almost to the day, ice storm here in Austin, Texas. It wasn't statewide, but it was, we lost about a third of our tree canopy here in Austin. I think some folks did some analysis from A&M, wow. Texas A&M, and they're like, we lost a lot of tree branches, and maybe not the whole tree, but a lot of brush fell, and it was everywhere, right? So we as a city kicked in, and we picked up a lot of the debris in the right-of-way and worked with the community to put it in the curb, and, we'll pick it up, right? And so we spent months cleaning up, right? My department doesn't own the creeks, right? So some of these creeks are private property, but, we try to maintain to not block the culverts and this and that. Long story short, in April of 2023, we had some major rain event in Northwest Austin that caused 60 homes to flood. And after we evaluated it, was a lot of that old brush that was dead from the winter storm earlier, several months earlier, that was just upstream that nobody picked up, nobody cleaned up, because we don't go into the creeks to trim bushes, trim trees. We don't do that, right? But that was a very important lesson, because had that debris not washed down, it wouldn't have blocked the culvert, right? Blocked the culvert, caused flooding, and it's a natural phenomenon. But so what we did is in order to prevent that, we first of all, in that particular community that experienced this, we went out there immediately, started clearing the debris that we could find. We started dredging the channels. We spent a lot of time making sure that this wasn't going to be repeated in that particular community. But then we expanded across the entire city. We evaluated all the high risk areas that we know there's potential flooding. And we worked with the contractors and our crews to go up and down the creeks to remove some. Once again, this is not normal. We don't normally do, but we knew we had lost a lot of tree canopy. And if we don't pick it up, there could be another storm event in another part of town, and it's going to do the same thing. So in an effort to prevent it, we invested a lot of time, money, and resources to remove things that In some cases, were really private property behind somebody's yard, but we cleaned it up, and we've had several events, and we're keeping an eye on it. And so in the future, if we have another major winter storm event that kills half our tree canopy, we may be proactively removing all that debris up and down the creeks just to be more preventive. But once again, it was a unique situation, and we jumped in and learned from that, and I think we're prepared for future events.
Yeah. Well, I guess my question would be, what keeps a director of watershed protection, what keeps you up at night? Is it you see a storm coming on the horizon, or is it more so like, hey, we're behind in our preparation if a storm does happen? Like it's 2 a.m., you're staring at the ceiling, you're thinking about work. What are you thinking about?
Yeah, that's a great question. That depending what night it is, at what time it is,
Yeah.
it may be a different answer. And so my job is to make sure that we're preparing ourselves and our community to deal with emergencies as it relates to our mission, which is stormwater erosion or water pollution. And so what keeps me up? Yes, storms naturally, because when you go through this, we had major floodings recently in 2013, 2015, where hundreds and hundreds of homes flooded. And unfortunately, we also had loss of life as well. And so we've remediated some of that by doing the buyouts that I told you about. In some areas, we've been working on capital improvement projects to add storm systems or expand the storm systems. So, but it takes time to implement some of the solutions. And matter of fact, that neighborhood example that I gave you that I'm not naming by name, but we were halfway through a capital project. We weren't done yet. Had we finished that project, maybe this wouldn't have occurred, but we weren't done with it. We're finishing it this year. But projects take time to plan, design, construct, right? And so what keeps me up at night is thinking about it. Have we done it as efficiently and as effectively as possible? Have we hit every area of town that needs to be evaluated to make sure that we have a plan in place? And some of these funding is limited, and we do lean on grants and federal funding. And right now that's up in the air. There's been a lot of grants that got pulled back as we're hearing. And so, making sure that we've done everything we could to protect the community, but also resilient communities. You hear that term a lot. It's also educating the community because the government can't always do everything. How are we doing better jobs to partner with the community for when the day comes that an emergency happens? We're helping each other. We're organized. And so that's what worries me, making sure that we've done everything we could to prepare for the events, but also once it happens, because we know that's going to happen, have we prepared the community in dealing and recovering from these events as they occur? With climate change, we're having to update our models, our engineering designs. And there's just so much to it that, you're never going to solve everything 100%. And once again, flash flood alley, some of the worst rain intensity in the world have happened in Central Texas, and some of the most recorded rainfall has fallen here. And we've seen a lot lately, right? In North Carolina, Florida, South Texas just last week. But that's the reality, is that there's a lot to be done. And when we haven't done it, and did we hit every spot, and so we spent a lot of time in the last couple of years engaging the community as we're updating our strategic plan, because we wanted to make sure that we weren't just doing the standard approach we've always done, where some of the community, for whatever reasons, don't get incorporated. And so we've been very intentional about going out to communities that were under served or not communicated. And so we've got new input, and we're wrapping up our strategic plan update. And so we're going to reprioritize projects, making sure that we got all voices in the room this time. And so we'll continue to do that. But the bottom line is, in Austin, any given day, depending on the rain event, you could have flooding. And so making sure that we've done everything we could.
Gotcha. Who's the, let's say the internal intercom line? Who are you mostly reaching out internally? Is it like the parks and recreation crew to say, hey, we lost these trees, can you send out some guys to pick them up? Is it the public information officer to say, hey, we're going to have a storm event, here's what you need to get out to the public? Is it the wastewater collections crew because there might be some overflows because of the excess water? Who do you talk to internally, or most often, and what is it usually about?
That's a great question. We actually have many departments in the city of Austin, and so we all lean on each other for many aspects. And so PIO, Public Information Office, the corporate one, so we have one within our department, a small division that partners anytime we do a press release to make sure that community knows that storm's coming. We work with Homeland Security Emergency Manager, HSCM. They're the lead primarily, but we provide a lot of information. You mentioned Parks Department. That is a department that we partner quite a bit with as well. But we have our own contracts and tree folks as well. But parks, are all over the city, and sometimes, we help each other out. With events. Like um, one of the things that has happened in Austin, and I think it's happened in a lot of communities, is people experiencing homelessness. And so we partner to help each other. So we have a homeless strategy office. It's been around for a couple of years now. It's relatively new here in Austin, but we partner with them. Street department, which is transportation public works here in Austin. We have to work with it. As you know, they own the street, they maintain the street, but the culverts or the drainage ways, those are stormwater. So we have to partner with each other, especially when there's a washout. Sometimes we're in there putting in the infrastructure, and then they come in and they do the roadway, water, wastewater. I mean, if we're doing a capital project, the right of way got so much space, right? And I always say we were the biggest pipe cut. Stormwater is the concrete, right? Our smallest size is 18 inches, right? And so, matter of fact, that neighborhood that I mentioned earlier, we're installing 11 by 13 foot box culverts. I mean, that's most of the roadway. So you have to relocate water, wastewater, telecom, gas, and so we do a good job in Austin in collaborating across the board, because we have to, right? We're not alone. We're one big city. And ultimately, the community sees the city of Austin. They don't see the water department. They don't see the watershed protection department. They see the city of Austin. And so we step in, and many of these events, emergencies we've had, like winter storms, those weren't storm water, but watershed was out there supporting the community, when the power was out, and doing wellness checks, providing water when the water distribution system failed us, providing logistical when we're ordering supplies during the pandemic, getting out there. So yeah, we actually, I don't have a straight answer, because we work with a lot of departments all the time.
That's totally
including,
fine.
by the way, Joseph, including our elected officials. It's vital that we keep them up to speed on what's happening in the district. So when the community is calling them, they have the latest, greatest information. So our PIO helps with that, but oftentimes, like when we have these flooding events, I'm calling council members saying, "Hey, we had flooding in your district, just so you know," and so they're aware.
Wow, you're like Inspector Gadget talking to 30 different people at 30 different levels.
Yes, sir. But it's teamwork, right? Ultimately, it's what it boils down to.
Yeah, good stuff. You kind of talked about how you upskill, but intentionally, like, are you reading books on watershed? You reading books on leadership, or what are your Google alerts set to, like, in regards to the information? Just because you've been doing this for a while, you can kind of say, I know everything. I've seen every flood there could be. There's no reason for me to pull in new information, but I can tell you want to get better and better the more as you go. So how do you do that intentionally?
Well, yes, you're right. You have to be intentional, and that's the word that I like to use. Continuous improvement starts with realizing that you have to be intentional about it. You have to understand who you are as a person, right? So a lot of self-assessments help me identify where my blind spots are. And so as part of the retreat we just had last week with the city manager, we did a DISC assessment. You may have heard of those. But the focus was on how your natural state is versus your adapted state. Sometimes you adapt based on the conditions of the scenario you're dealing with. So it's important to know how you react to certain situations. So it's been very eye-opening. So I spent this weekend just reviewing that report again for the second, third time, and strategizing. I create my own performance improvement plan, my own PIP plan. Like, okay, this area I think I need to improve on, and this is what I'm going to do to take action. And so, yes, it will follow with books. And that particular focus we were doing in our retreat Friday was around servant leadership, which is, once again, a natural fit for me. So I've done numerous. So yeah, at any given time, I'm listening. I use a lot of it Audible to listen to books, because I'm just better at retaining versus reading it on a book. And so, yes, I've got 10, 12 books going on at a given time. So I'm walking my dog, I'm listening to a different book, but I'm always thriving to learn, and even going back and rereading old books. And so as a leader, I focus probably 60% of my reading in leadership development, or podcasts. Brene Brown, I'm a big fan of Brene Brown, courageous leadership, and making sure dare to lead. There are different ways that I try to just emulate, and I do it by listening to how other leaders are talking about it. But once again, to be a great leader, or a leader that's inspirational, you got to have warmth, and competency. You have to have both both components, and the warmth comes from just being authentic with your staff, your community, and making sure that you're responding. Emotional intelligence is a big part to come across like you understand the situation. But competency, like I said, conferences, I try to divvy it up. Conferences, I focus on training on technical engineering stuff, stormwater stuff, but also leadership side of it too. So I'm always learning. Here in Austin, one of our neighbors north of us is a small little town called Pflugerville. And it's not spelled the way it sounds. It's very complicated. But anyways, I went to a conference, a few weeks ago to Denver. It was called Reimagining Local Government. So I went over there to see how it could be inspired. And the last presentation I went to was an awesome leader. It's assistant city manager. And I came away inspired. And so at the end of the presentation, I go up to him and say, hey, man, I came all the way to Denver to be inspired by my neighbor across from Austin, Pflugerville. So he worked with City of Pflugerville. So we agreed to get some barbecue when we're back in town. But yeah, he shared his leadership journey, from coming from the Pacific West to what he's doing here in Central Texas now. And sometimes you go to conferences to be inspired, but as a leader, you have to inspire it. You have to stay relevant, right? There's always things that are changing in leadership or even in your technical area. So reading books is a key to my success, I think.
Sure. What's Jorge like when we're about town? Like, are you the guy that you're driving, let's say in a different city or your city, you're looking at the culverts, you're looking at the gutters, you're looking to see if there's decent, flood management.
I can't stop thinking about what I know, right? So anywhere you see me, no matter what community, but in Austin, if you're visiting Austin, I'm gonna be highlighting and bragging about the great work we've done here, right? Of course, And so when you've been part of building things like the new Central Library or the Waller Creek Tunnel here in Austin, I haven't even talked about that. Waller Creek is one of our watersheds that used to create a lot of that devastating flooding downtown. So we built a mile-long tunnel that's 24-foot average diameter. It's huge. So ever in town, Joseph, I would love to showcase the beautiful park that we built where the inlet facility is. It's called Waterloo Park, But I always try to highlight the great work we're doing to continue to move things forward here in Austin. But yeah, if you're with me, I'm probably going to be pointing out pavement defects because I have a pavement background, or ADA non-compliance because I know all about ADA sidewalk designs and this and that. So it's hard to disconnect what and like, well, this could be better if you did it this way. Well, this signal timing that might have been off. So I do get kind of geeked out on my engineering background.
In all your studies, like who's doing the best at, let's say, flood management around the world? Like, is there a,
Oh, wow, that's a great question, man. I don't know if I can answer it around the world, but I do believe China does some very impressive engineering work. The way they built their communities. Some of the Asian countries have just done a great job, of doing things grand scale. I mean, like here, I mean, we've done great work around the U.S. as well. I mean, I was visiting the Hoover Dam for the first time about 3 years ago with my kids. And when you look at that marvel of an engineering structure and what it does, and then you look at the sign, and this was done in 4 years. I'm trying to build projects in 10 years, So we've done some amazing things here in the U.S. Oh, I stood at the Golden Gate Bridge and like, it's just a marvel to think engineers designed this, a long time ago. So we have such great capacity. And so the U.S. has so many great, civil works that we've done, public works. In New Orleans, I know it was devastating floods and it was Katrina and all that, but then the Army Corps of Engineers came back and did some retrofits. And so there's a lot of work, good stormwater work we've done across the country. But as climate continues to change and intensity of rains continue to, intensify, we have to prepare for the future state. And sometimes you're not going to be able to solve through a civil engineering project. Once again, you're going to have to prepare the communities, make sure they don't develop in the areas that are at risk. Or once something happens, make sure they know how to bounce back.
Yeah. Give a tip to, let's say, a young stormwater watershed let's say engineer, they just get handed the keys to a city or to a department. What should they be looking at first? Is it something that you look and see what's already there, or what should you be, I guess where would your brain go if you just get handed the keys to a city that's already there, and how to improve on it?
That's a great question. So going back to my early days as an intern, I think I learned what I've learned over the years, and probably made me a more effective leader because I've been in boots on the ground, right? So you got to get out of the office. You got to get out in the field. You got to go out there and shadow and go along with the crews that are actually out there maintaining the infrastructure or building the infrastructure. So as an intern, I used to go out and inspect. We have detention ponds and water quality ponds that we do here in Austin to help slow the water down and mitigate the flooding impacts downstream. And so you got to make sure they're maintained. So part of my job was to go out there and assess these ponds. When we would get these 311 complaints, go out there with the engineers to evaluate what happened and just observe. So as you're coming into an organization, you want to get out of the office. Of course, you want to understand the technical component. So the other part of that is also sit down and read all the criteria manuals. For drainage, most communities have drainage criteria manuals. Environmental regulations have environmental criteria manuals. So as an engineer, if you're going to be in this area, you have to understand the do's and the don'ts and how that community operates. Because each community is different. I couldn't go to Virginia and operate the same DNPs that we do in Austin because it's a different soils, different topography. They're not flash flood. You can't go to Nevada, right? It's very different over there. And so you want to learn what your community has when it comes to the technical manuals, the code. Sometimes, if you don't read the code, you don't understand the complexity of zoning, and there's so many criteria for a design component. If you're going to be designing, you have to understand how your work complements or conflicts with other departments and start having a relationship. So that's the other part is you in the local government, you don't do anything by yourself. You have to have relationships. You have to network. So that's the other part is getting out of your office because you got to get to know your peers in other departments. In some cases, even other entities like the school district. Here we have the Metro, Cap Metro. We have the Transportation Department, which is state agencies, right? So you have to work with the state or the county. So there's a lot to be done outside of the office. And so that's the biggest part is when you join an organization, you got to get out there and look at the infrastructure, get to know the people building and maintaining it, and the people that are going to help you accomplish whatever projects you're going to do in that organization.
Yeah. And speaking of getting out of the office, I always think of that image of, they got George Bush looking out the window at the flooding in Katrina, right?
Yeah.
the photo that speaks so loudly. But I would say the thing with that photo kind of, like you said, getting out of the office. What do you say to those who, again, they just got handed a department in a city and there's an incident? Like, what are some of the ways that you best approach the public with, hey, this is what happened and here's what we're trying to do to fix it, or this is what's going to happen, here's how you as a community member can help us? What's your thought process?
Well, it's important to not shy away of the situation that just occurred. You have to lead with empathy, right? You have to start out by communicating, like, we understand what just happened. It's very difficult, but how are we going to move forward? And here's what we as a city are doing, and here's the resources we're providing. Make sure there's constant communications with the community. Make sure they know where their resources, and listen. First thing we did when we had that neighborhood flooding event. Once again, I called the elected officials, but then I went out there with the elected officials, and we just listened. There was a lot of venting, a lot of frustration, a lot of anger. But you're a public servant. You're there to listen and hear their concerns, and then start addressing the things you can address quickly, and those that take a little more time, start coordinating and making sure that you're providing assurances that you're doing everything you can. But make sure you're following through with action too, because community doesn't want to hear words; they want to see action, right? And so that's the first thing is just be very transparent about what just happened, what the next steps are. And in our case, we reached out to the American Red Cross and another nonprofit to see what other sources, because as a public entity, you can't provide resources into private property, right? That's not how it works, right? And so we had to bring in other folks that can maybe provide. And then we learned from the community that maybe things weren't the resources provided weren't adequate, and so we look for other resources because ultimately we want to support the community in this journey, which is a difficult one of recovering through a flooding event. Making sure that you have staff that are out there and just making sure that we're listening and responding to the needs. But you have to have a clear game plan, and that we're communicating so they know that you're taking action. And you have to not take it personal because there's a lot of emotions involved with flooding, fires, whatever, a natural disaster, and as humans, it's very difficult times, and so you want to be there and support them, and don't take it personal when people are going to take it out on you potentially, right?
Let's talk misconceptions. Let's say you're at a dinner party and of
Mhm.
course always get the question. So Jorge, nice to meet you. What do you do? And you tell them you're the director of Watershed Protection, Department, City of Austin Watershed Department. What do you think they think you do? Like, what are some of the biggest misconceptions about what you do?
That's a great question, because this happens literally quite a bit. And so the first thing they think is we're part of the water utility. The Austin Water Utility is a different department that, like I said earlier, they deal with potable water, the water that you drink out of the faucet. They deal with wastewater, the water that goes into the treatment plants. And of course, here in Austin, we have also reclaimed water. So water utility is the first thing they think is like, oh yeah, they start talking about the water and this and that. They're like, well, and so I start explaining, my 2-minute elevator pitch of it's the rain that falls from the sky, hits the ground. That's what we do. We protect from stormwater. We deal with the infrastructure, the environment of the community. So the city of Austin has an environmental officer role. It's part of our department, and we evaluate all development, both public and private development, with environment as our number one priority, and that came from the community that got put into the land development code. And so I try to explain, we deal with flooding, erosion, and all the water pollution. So when a few years ago, we were having dogs that would get sick because they would get in the water, and there's some toxic algae developed over the last several years based on the climate warmth. And so, we have scientists, we have engineers, we have people that are out there maintaining the infrastructure. So I started explaining the complexity of the department, but first of all, just to make sure they understand that, we are different than the water department or the public works department. And so usually people get it once we do that. And I have an entire education division that spends time in the schools. We have over 90 schools. We're out working with the kids, educating them on flood situations, so that prevent from, as they grow up, and environmental, what can you do to be a good steward of the environment. So we do a lot of education to the young kids, but once again, try to do our best to explain when people are confused initially, because watershed protection is not a common name for a department, and it's difficult for people to comprehend. But once I tell them, they understand what it is.
Gotcha. Okay. What's the month of the year where your wife knows there's no vacations for Jorge? Like you're all hands on deck, but whether it's the rainy month or whatever, like when is that?
So because of my role as a director, we do go through a budget process of adopting the budget. So in the summer timeframe, there's a certain window that we're presenting to council, and those are generally. But Austin, a lot of our flooding events have occurred during major holidays, believe it or not. Memorial Day flooding of 1981, 2015, the Halloween floods, we call them, in 2013, 2015, those major floods that flooded hundreds and hundreds of homes. So we've so I'm aware of it, but I'm not prevented from traveling during that time. But we historically have used May as a flood awareness week we create to educate our community. But recently we've shifted it. This year we're doing it in April, because we realize a lot of times it is raining and there is flooding happening in May. It's just hard to be out there in the community reminding people what to do when they're already dealing with it, right? So we moved it up to April. We'll be doing it this year in April. But Flood Awareness Week is a way that we use to educate not just the schools, but our entire community, what they can do to prepare, because we always want to be flood ready. And so we have websites, we have all kinds of stuff we promote to our community. But yeah, back to your question, I think there's a small window because of budgetary reasons that as we're preparing the budget to council, that we limit the travel.
Gotcha. I thought there was like a couple weeks out of the year where you're whipping out your waders and your rubber boots, and
generally
like it's flood season, baby. We're okay. Springtime.
Yeah, generally that is the springtime.
Okay. All right. Let's say your commission to put up a billboard, and this billboard is in the most trafficked area of Austin. What ask of your community in regards to rainwater, stormwater would you put on this billboard?
Okay. Well, I'm going to put basic information to go to our website, basically. But one of the themes here in Texas we've done, because once again, flash flood alley, a lot of low water crossings. We have hundreds of low water crossings that the water goes over the top of the roads. So we use a very common thing called turn around, don't drown. You may have heard about it, but It's something that we started here in Texas through the Texas Floodplain Managers Association, which are a big partner of ours. But basically, educating our communities, like if you see water in the road, turn around, don't drown. And that's a big thing. We'll continue to do it. And so you may actually see it, you'll hear it on the radio. We put out a lot of, like right now, springtime, we get flooding, right? So we have a lot of media outlets that we put this information out there, and reminding community that, to be safe and prepare for if there's flooding.
Okay. I always like to leave a space on the show for you to thank mentors along your journey. And then also, I want you to give a word of motivation and inspiration to your fellow watershed counterparts across the nation.
Yes, sir. Well, I'm glad you bring up the mentors because a lot of times we are on this journey or this path because somebody helped us, guide us along that way, right? So generally speaking, most former bosses are great mentors, right? Because as a boss, you're supposed to be a coach and a mentor to your employees, right? So I would definitely put all my former bosses, because even from the bad I can learn, right? So when I've had a bad boss, and I won't put no names out there, but you learn from the experiences, the good and the bad. But in one case, he was my boss, he was my peer at one time, and then at one time he was my subordinate before he retired. But always a friend and a mentor to me, Jose Guerrero. So he hired me as an intern in 1998 when I first got out of the military. That was the first. I met him, and on the spot, he offered me an internship job, and I ended up doing that for 2 years, part-time working and going to school, right? But once again, throughout the years, we got to work, collaborate together. When I moved back to the Dallas area, we were still partner, mentor. And then I came back to Austin and came back to Watershed, and it ultimately became a director, and he became one of my assistant directors. And so it's been quite a journey. We still interact. He still works part-time, even though he's retired. But I wouldn't be on the path that I'm at now had he not given me that first opportunity. When he met me, he said, "Oh, you're studying engineering." I literally had just started. I didn't know what I was going to do. Civil engineering is a very broad degree, right? And so, he gave me that first opportunity. And more importantly, he leads with heart. And that's my leadership philosophy. I literally branded it leading with heart. So I learned that from him. And so when you care, and we're doing it for the right reasons, right? As public servants, you have to care. If not, it's definitely not for the money. We all know that, right? So I learned that from him, and so I'm very grateful and thankful to him.
Okay. And then those watershed managers, those department leads out there, they're fighting the same battles you're fighting. What do you say to keep them motivated, keep them inspired?
Let's continue to collaborate. So I'm a member of many organizations that are national organizations, like American Public Works Association, American Society of Civil Engineers, International Managers, County Managers, City County Managers Association. So I'm staying involved in those organizations. And when we have conferences around the country, oftentimes I'm talking to communities. Austin's not a small city anymore, almost 1 million people, or like top 10, 12 any given day, because we're always back and forth with other cities. But when I'm out there, the local small 10,000 population cities are dealing with the same issues that we, the big cities, are dealing with. So we need to keep talking and keep collaborating and learning from each other, So let's keep that dialogue going in whatever professional organization, and reach out across the country, because you don't have to just stay within your. I work a lot here in Texas, because Texas is pretty big, right? So I know folks in Dallas, Houston, San Antonio, but ultimately let's keep collaborating, keep presenting what you're doing, because I learned so much when I go to these conferences of, like I said, no matter the size of your city, when you have a problem and you found a solution, go out and present it at these conferences so we can all keep learning from each other.
Yeah, appreciate that. All right, let's say I'm coming to town. I'm coming to Austin, and I text you ahead of time. I say, Jorge, where can I go to get the best burger in Austin? Where are you going to send me?
Oh, great, Joseph. That's an excellent question. Burgers in particular, huh? So, well, first of all, I got to say, we have some great burger spots. But ultimately, I would probably steer you to some of the older local shops, because you're not going to get that in, there's national chains of great burgers here.
Yeah, no chains.
Anywhere else. So right here where I work, right next to me, there's this great location, which right next to Whataburger. And Whataburger it used to be just a Texas thing. Now it's expanded. So it's gone corporate, right? Okay. So it's not just in Texas. And this little place is called Sandy's, and it's right next to Whataburger. And it's still successful because they do some great burgers. They have some custard too, so you get some ice cream while you're there. But I would highly recommend that one. I go there more often than I should, because I can literally walk over there when I'm hungry. But there's another local one that I really like. It's called Dan's Hamburgers. They have several spots, maybe 2 or 3 locations, but that's another one. So check them out. They're great. But Joseph, I must say, if you're talking to my boys, I have 5 boys, like I said earlier. They say my burgers are the best ones. So I would invite you if you're in town. Joseph, I invite you to my backyard and I make you a burger myself.
I like it, man. I like it. 5 boys, if they say it's good, boys, we always buck against what our dad says and thinks. So if they say it's good, then it must be good.
Right. So I'm starting to believe them now. So we'll see.
Good stuff, Jorge. Well, thank you for hopping on the podcast today. Thank you for sharing your wealth of information and knowledge with us. All the listeners, make sure you share this with somebody who you think needs to hear it. Any final words before we get out of here?
Yeah, if you're interested to see what we're doing here in Austin, just go to austintexas.gov/watershed. WATE. Let me slow down. WATERSHED, watershed. And so you can go to our website. I got videos up. I got YouTube videos. I mean, Watershed, we're putting a lot of stuff on our local government website, but anybody can access it, And so please go check out, see what we're doing in all our projects, our programs. We're doing some great things here in Austin. So I want to make sure others get access to that as well.
Love it. Love it. Jorge, once again, thanks for hopping on the podcast. This has been another episode of the Public Works Podcast. And thank you, everybody, for tuning in.